that's out there.
You're good to go whenever you guys want to start.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. It is 10:01. Let's go. All right. I'm going to just start by sharing my screen. Thank you, Bob and Jim. I got your um, your feedback, and John gave me some over the weekend. So um, I actually haven't had a chance to review your feedback yet, Jim. I had one of my team members put it, kind of create a combined document. So I'm going to do that there.
Oh, well, we also got to thank Adam too.
Yeah, I sent some after it was probably like 5:30 last night. I sent some pretty extensive notes.
All right, I'm going to pull those up right now. I've been having email issues, so let me see if I can find them.
And Bob, I did listen to you. That's why I put numbers on my review.
Adam, I truly apologize, but I can do what I'll do is I have yours. I'm going to split screen. If this isn't too hard for everybody to see, can you guys see the two screens side by side? Or is that too hard to see?
No, it's not bad.
Yeah,
I mean, I can see it.
I'm all right, but I have a pretty big monitor at work here.
Yeah.
Same story for me.
Oh, so you're bragging, huh?
No.
I'm just
Well,
old and
is
have
that
old
what our
eyes.
taxes that our taxes are going to? Come on.
That's I'll tell you, big monitors and stand-up desks have increased company productivity in my company. Like it's nobody's business. Like I go into everybody's offices and they're all standing up. And you know, it's made such a difference. People feel better. It's funny. So
It's not
all
a
right.
new monitor and it's not high resolution, if that makes you feel better.
It's just ginormous.
A little.
It's like 24 inches. I don't know. It's not giant. It's not one of those big gaming ones with the curved screens or anything.
Yeah, I haven't let the curved screens happen yet, but we go with some pretty big monitors here. Our drafts people. I think that they're actually controlling satellites and air traffic controlling in there instead of drawing houses. But
yeah,
all right. So the first issue was vetting and communication of subsurface sewage disposal system requirements. You have lots of comments. And,
yeah.
and
Should I like how do you want to handle this? Should I just launch?
You just tell us your comments as we go.
Yeah. So my recollection of our discussion was like you wanted a formalization of the process and a regular established cadence for predictability. I don't recall discussing any specific issues with vetting, education, or communication. What issues are you seeing? What exactly do you think they mean in this context? I'm not sure if there's particular examples we'd like to address in this group. I'm happy to examine that further, but I don't recall ever discussing any vetting or education issues specifically in this group. So if it's going to end up in the report, I think we need to discuss the specifics of where the group thinks the process has broken down and give the department an opportunity to respond to that.
Yep. One, I think I'll start with the sheer fact that we're here.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if we review how we got to where we are today, the requirement for this working group came from a policy change and basically appealing of that to legislatures and that is what got this whole ball rolling. So I think that anytime government agencies can just make policy change, and that policy change can happen in the middle of the year, at the end of the year, whenever they want to, whenever it needs to, they want to make it happen, they can just make that policy change. And that policy change is unvetted by the industry in which they're governing. And then there's very little legislative oversight. I think that lends to a contentious environment. It lends to a environment where the users of that program don't know how to plan or really plan or expense what this is going to cost when they're trying to build and provide housing. So I think that this is like the whole premise of why we're here, is because we had an issue that we kind of got over our skis from a policy standpoint, and the legislators kind of wanted to pull it back. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, we're here because of the regs, not the technical standards. Regs don't go through the code advisory committee. They go through the regulatory process, very similar to about 75% of the process that the building code person at yesterday's full group meeting explained, in terms of public hearing, public comment period, sending to the legislature, et cetera. DPH has even taken the step that we shared initial drafts on this with interested stakeholders, including the Home Builders Association, and took and incorporated comments where appropriate, starting in October of last year, so over a year ago. And then so after taking that document, official public comment on the regs opened up as the statutory required 30 days, I believe in February. And that's about the same time that we saw the bill raised on this. I don't believe our public comment period has even closed yet when a bill was raised on this particular issue. Now, due to the issue of the pending legislation, we haven't released further documents on this as we discussed the regs process in that regard. So I think one of the things this section does, and would be confusing, is that Code Advisory Committee does not address the regs, right? They discuss the technical standards that the department puts together. It has legislative authority to do that. Code Advisory Committee is a body that the department has convened to receive advice and feedback from affected stakeholders as part of that technical standards process. But that technical standards process is separate from the regs.
So on the conversation around the regs, you gave notice to all these stakeholders, but you did zero collaboration with any stakeholders.
No, we held a meeting. We asked for written feedback. At that meeting, we asked for any concerns and to follow up.
Did you change the regs? Were the regs at all modified or changed after those concerns were aired?
I believe they were, yeah. I'd have to go back to check exactly what may have been modified as part of that process. But in my recollection of the documents we received at the time, there was not particularly that much detail in what should be changed. So it was a bit surprising to us when, after having these stakeholder sessions, that we were then months later a little surprised to find out some of the pushback, because that was not clearly expressed to us back when we had the initial stakeholder session.
Yeah, and so I guess my intent here, and please others chime in, our intent is, if this could have a formal standing group, much like the Code and Standards Committee, that works hand in hand with DPH. There's members of DEEP, there's members of DPH, there's representatives from local health districts, engineers, et cetera, that are now all in this group. It's a volunteer organization. They're in this group and they're there to review regs and review technical standards. And those regs and those technical standards can only be modified once a year. And we go forth at that cadence. Wouldn't it be a much more comfortable working environment to know that like you have stakeholders that are representing their industry and you're able to vet it through and come up with the best possible solution ahead of time? And those people are empowered not to just provide comment. Those people are empowered to help direct the policy. Doesn't that sound like a better way to do business than the way that you just described it? Because like it didn't work for you guys and it didn't work for us. So we got to a point that basically we were jamming it down our lawmakers, phone lines, like stop, and that's how we got here. I'm gonna let Jim jump in there. Jim.
Thank you. The whole purpose and what makes the subsurface section at the Department of Public Health very unique is the technical standards. And the technical standards first came about in 1982. A couple of gentlemen had some foresight, and what the technical standards section is allows DPH to change, update, do whatever they need to do to technical standards without having to go to a legislator. The legislation is dealing with the public health code. That will need legislative action. The technical standards doesn't need legislative action. It can just get reviewed and approved. Maybe Adam can help me. I don't know if there is public comments prior to the technical standards being approved, but it circumvents the legislative actions for the technical standards. Does the code committee, over the course of reviewing and even looking at, could they recommend changes to the public health code? They have, because I think sometimes the B100A was revised, and Section 1913 B103 has been revised. I think once, maybe twice since I've been doing this. So the Code Advisory Committee could have some input in directions to the change of the public health code, thus that would have to require legislative action.
So responding to a couple things that Matt brought up first. So these, certainly unlike the building code, these regs, and I think Jim touched on this a little bit, these regs are updated very infrequently. This is the first major regs update that we've done on this section in a very long time, and that was prompted by legislation that passed a few years back that expanded the capacity that's overseen by the department, and we felt that our regs for the smaller systems they were not fit to purpose for the larger systems anymore. So that's what prompted this regs revision, which is very, very infrequent on this. And just because you have a body like the Building Code and Standards Committee, yesterday's presentation, he pointed out that every year they're dealing with some legislative changes that still come down the pipe. So just because you have a set committee, that apparently doesn't solve the problem, because this is something that the Building Code Committee is also dealing with as well. And I think generally speaking, having regulated entities vote on their regulations would be not something the department is comfortable with. There are the regulators and there are the regulated entities for a reason. And I think the building code is a little different than the septic technical standards, in that the building code has a national framework that they go off of that's pretty universally accepted. And the Code and Standards Committee seems to be tweaking it slightly around the edges, maybe to make it fit the purpose for the state of Connecticut, but it's not doing an entire from scratch drafting. And so it's not
And I wouldn't
quite
recommend that they do the drafting. I think you guys still do the drafting. It just gets vetted and approved by this entity. Now, if the DPH says, you know what, we don't agree with our entity, and they take it forward to legislature without that approval, that's one thing.
So are you saying that the Code Advisory Committee should be the voting body that sent it to the legislature, or just what?
So there's also bills. So like bills can get to legislatures outside of the Code and Standards Committee. They'll often say, hey, what does the Code and Standards Committee think about this? So when there are legislative issues like, a resiliency issue or something like that, they try to get it all taken care of at the Codes and Standards Committee. That's the intent. But people often, legislators themselves, will often do a loop around, and it often gets sent back for opinion. But there's always a loop around anybody. But I just don't. If you have a group of volunteers who you help pick who they are, you're getting seasoned professionals from your users, from partnering organizations like the sanitarians and the health departments and deep, and any other organizations that we kind of reach out to. I just don't see a valid argument for not being more inclusive in the drafting of the regs and the technical standards. Yes, and I'm gonna let Bob go here. Sorry, Bob.
That's fine, thank you. No, a good conversation. And I think what we're really looking at is a way to have better input from the regulated community and the local sanitarians and engineers and the experts in it. There's one thing with the whole issue with the legislature is sometimes the legislature will there'll be a fire in a house and someone gets killed and some legislator decides that we need to have smoke detectors in a house and they have to be hardwired. And that was done 25 years ago, maybe longer. I mean, they were already in the code, but they have to be hardwired. Now, since that time, there's 100 other ways we can put smoke detectors in, battery operated, Wi-Fi. There's a whole bunch of different ways, and long-term batteries. But because it was done in legislation, it's nearly impossible to get that changed in the code without going to the legislature again and saying you need to take it out. So we're constantly fighting with legislators not to put regulations in legislative terms versus sending it to Codes and Standards Committee and say, hey, we want you to look at putting smoke detectors and how they should be managed. And that can evolve and change over time as new technology becomes available. And so that's why we're always adamant with legislators not to mess with the code in that nature. And typically what they do in most cases is send it to Codes and Standards to be reviewed and determine what's the best practice and then implement it. Or come back to them and tell them we're not doing it, we don't think it's a good idea, and these are the reasons why. And I think that's sort of the same thing we're trying to do here on public health is say, let's get the best minds around it. And those are the guys that have to install it. Those are the guys that design it. Those are the guys that inspect it. And, and you guys have the experience and knowledge, but what we feel like, at least I'm going to speak for myself, and I was at several of the code advisory committee meetings over the last couple of years, is that yeah, you ask for our input, but at the end of the day, if you decide you don't like what we're saying, we really don't have much of a say in it. You guys can sort of do whatever you want. And I hate to be that harsh with it, but that's kind of how it feels the way it is now. And we just feel like it needs to go to a code advisory committee slash codes and standards committee. I don't care what you call it, but just that they have a little more teeth and they can say, listen, let's do the research, let's do the background and determine if nitrogen removal is really critical to the environment. And if the group comes up with it, and not just a couple of people, because right now it's being done by just a handful of people, quite honestly, and they may be experts in that area. I don't know. But let them come before a codes and standards committee and say, this is the issue. This is what we're trying to fix. These are the new rules we'd like to put in place to solve that problem. And then if you do a good job of selling it to them, I don't see why they wouldn't say, Adam, great job. You guys run with it. You know, Matt brings something forward, or whatever it is, they bring something forward. You get sign off and you get buy-in, quite honestly, from everybody that's being regulated. And that's what happened in this past time that felt like there was a disconnect. And that's really, in my mind, the big focus of this whole thing.
Yeah, I just don't know how codifying the code of standards, code advisory committee in statute as a voting body necessarily solves that, solves your concerns there. Just because, we reached out broadly to anyone that would have an interest in these regs, from home builders to environmental advocacy groups and everywhere in between, to gather feedback. Reached out to our colleagues at Deep to get their feedback on how they think the system works. Took our own internal expertise, spoke with local health departments and their expertise, people with experience in the fields that we're regulating here. And this is the document that we felt best balanced the needs of people in the state of Connecticut, their public health, while also striving to streamline and simplify the process for home building, which we believe was the purpose of the legislative change. This process would be a lot more clear and uniform and predictable than, for instance, what currently we hear exists at Deep. What it seems like we ran into some issues in an attempt to make it uniform and predictable. Some of the things that the site-specific regulations at Deep allow for, that require a lot of on-site specific planning and are difficult to plan for statewide, because the things you need, like bring in, a particular AT system, or trucking in different kinds of soils that need to be monitored and maintained. That is always going to be a site-specific determination. While what we were trying to do was predictability and clarity throughout these regulations. And I think, or at least from what I'm hearing in some of the other committees, is there hasn't been any big changes suggested to the regulations as currently drafted. There has been some tweaks that I think we had already discussed in previous iterations, negotiations that led up to the creation of this group. But I haven't been hearing any major changes to the regulations suggested by this process yet. So I'm not really sure what would have ended up being different.
Matt, if I can just add, the one thing that I think has come up that has been a pretty serious concern, and I'm not sure how long ago this really started getting discussed, but the whole issue around nitrogen and whether or not it's necessary, required, should it be universal across the entire state, or should it be more focused on the shoreline areas and that sort of thing? I mean, I think that's a big issue that I would have preferred to have more discussion on. I don't know if that was early on in this last set of kind of code advisory discussions and stuff, but I don't remember talking about that or hearing about it a year to 2 years, well, 2.5, 3 years ago, but it's come up recently.
Our nitrogen changes were in the initial drafts that were shared back over a year ago now, last October. And we received, at the time, my recollection is we received very little specific comments on those. those particular nitrogen requirements.
You know, and I'll make one last plug, and then let's
Mhm.
figure out how we want to move forward with this item. As a business person operating in this environment, like I know that Johnny Carrier and the people that are on the Codes and Standards Committee are properly vetting and doing the best that they can for one, the organization, two, the industry, and three, for safety and good building practices. So like I don't have to follow it as closely because I know that we have a solid voice who's vetting this. And when Johnny Carrier walks away from that group with his email to us and says, "Hey, this is the code change. This is the data that's coming in. You know, these are the things we like. These are the things we didn't like. We fought hard on this, but you know, the resiliency group beat us on this, and we're going to go forward and yada yada yada." I know. All right, it's been vetted. I'm good. You know, I don't go storming down to the legislator saying, "But wait, you know, one more try." You know, we kind of trust in the process because we've been invited to be part of the process, and and this type of vehicle would allow all the stakeholders to be part of the process. And it's not going to be as intensive as the building code standard, buildings coding. You know what I'm trying to say? A little tongue tied. It's going to be less intensive because the changes are less frequent and less, you know, they're less frequent and they're not being forced down from a higher entity like, you know, the International Building Code. So, you know, I don't think it's going to be that hard of a lift for DPH to say, yeah, we're going to embrace this advisory council. We're going to give them some teeth so they can properly vet this thing, and they're going to chew back and forth at each other until we get it right. And by the way, this code and standards committee that we would put together is not just made up of builders and sanitarian and people in the field. It's going to be, you're going to bring in some academics. You're going to bring in, you know, environmental people. You're going to bring in all the people that are going to represent all the different facets involved in the argument. So it's not like the builder is going to be like, yeah, we got this. Now we get to stomp on whatever they bring forward. That's not the intent. That's not the hope. We just need it to be properly vetted and make sure that we understand it before it comes out, and then put in a good cadence for these kind of changes. So how do we want to move forward? John, lead us out of this hole.
That's, I don't know. I'm gonna have to reread what we've got here, but I mean, I think we could reconsider the sort of the phrasing of some of that. I mean, I think we have legitimate concerns about insufficient input or responsiveness to the input. It's just maybe a question of how we're phrasing the specifics of the recommendation. And I still struggle a little bit with sort of two sets of comments. It's easier for me one set of comments to sort of respond to at a given time. But I don't know. I mean, Matt, we can sort of take another look at what is being proposed here, and if we can rephrase that. If you know, I hear what Adam's saying here, but I'm
okay with part of the discussion too, saying, you know, DPH
yeah, sure.
feels as such. You know, all we can do is try to capture what we think the issue is, what we think we got to capture all the discussion, and then you know, we gotta make some kind of recommendation. I really wish Matt was still participating. Is there a reason
Yeah,
he's not available
Matt's
anymore?
off for Christmas this week. And then he had a medical appointment that was conflicting last week. So I think he'll be on for the next meeting. It's just the last two have conflicted with some conflicts that he's had.
Excellent. Peter, can I ask you a question real quick? Do do you have the ability to give us a transcript of this meeting, or do we just have to go to the video? I think he's checked out. He's like, it's recording, we're good. Because I've actually had AI create a transcript for me, but it was a little sloppy, and it would just make it easier if I had a transcript. But we can check in with him at the end. So we really want this to be collaborative, Adam, and we appreciate your comments, and I understand where you're coming from. Um, I'm unfortunately I'm always pushing back against regulation without validation. So um, let's work on this again, and maybe John and I'll put our heads together to kind of redraft something, and we'll get it over to you for comments again. The nice thing is, I think we're about a week ahead of everybody else. So I think we'll have some time to vet through this and hopefully come up with a good solution. Bob?
Yeah, man, I just want to make sure I'm kind of understanding, Adam, kind of where you guys are coming from, and that is, are you worried that a codes and standards type of a setup is going to restrict your ability to um, bring new regulations into play or new technologies into play or is it going to make the whole process more complicated in your opinion? I'm trying to understand. I'd like to give this other group some more authority than what we currently have, but I certainly don't want to tie your hand to not being able to move forward with good policy and good regulation. So I'm just trying to understand, is there a middle ground where we feel like there's a little better system in place to get the feedback, but still make it happen and not, I'm not trying to make it harder or more complicated.
Yeah, I mean, I think with certainly the tech standards, we want to keep that process as nimble as possible to address any new technologies that may come in, or I know it's been discussed the department perhaps getting AT or something, to address that. And I know certainly new systems with AT come online, regularly, and the science is constantly evolving and changing in that. So having kind of a nimble body that can look at that, take expert feedback, which I think with what the current code advisory committee set up for was the forum for discussion with the department on current best practices. I'm not sure, is there any examples from the tech standards process where there's been a change that, the industry has particularly felt it's been cumbersome? I'm not sure I've heard that. If there's an example of a tech standards change in the last few years that's been cumbersome, I'd be interested in hearing that and learning more about that. I just haven't or heard a precise example of that process breaking down in that way.
Jim, you're on the group, right? You've been on that group before? And Bob, sorry.
No, I have not been on that group. I'm sorry, I've never been on that group. I could not take time away from my work to go on that group. That was my reasoning. So
Bob, have you been on that group?
You're talking about the code advisory committee?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have not formally been on it. I think Bob Fusari was at one point in time, and I'm not sure if David Potts was. Those guys have been on it. I was getting involved because of my involvement with government affairs, and I started going more as a public member and making some comments. But again, it felt like I was just sort of an outsider, and this thing had already been pre-decided. And it wasn't until we got on this group that I got a much better understanding of what Matt's going through, and I didn't realize just how small this little department or portion of DPH is. Um, and I honestly think that it helps some of those things. If we had a code advisory committee to look at AT systems, and they're doing all the research and the heavy lifting, and then bringing it back to those of us that just know this superficially. For me, I didn't even know what nitrogen was other than one of the three numbers on a bag of fertilizer. That's all I knew about nitrogen until, a year and a half ago. All of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, this is an environmental issue that we need to talk about. So, those are sort of some of the things I feel like we're going to get experts that are like kind of what you're saying, Matt, is that we've got some experts that are reviewing these things. Sonia brought up something with the secondary covers on septic tanks that, had become a problem, and the installers gave feedback and said, listen, this is a problem because of X, Y, and Z. And I think they'd also be able to go back to this code advisory committee or codes and standard type committee and go, hey, we're seeing this problem. Can we do something? And there can be interim changes. So I don't think it's like we're only going to make changes every 3 years. I don't think the process is going to be a whole lot different than what we're currently doing, other than the advisory committee has a little more, I don't know, buy into the process or something. That's really what I'm seeing is the only difference. I don't think we're going to tie people's hands up any more than we do now.
More legitimacy. And quite honestly, after DPH's technical standards or regulations clear that bar, it's kind of more of a cakewalk once you get past that, that process. And that's the intent is it's a smaller, more controlled group that allows for that oversight and that feedback. And they're experts. They're not me standing there. Maybe I am, but then I'd have to get smarter. But it's the David Potts's, it's the installers, it's the guy that puts in 100 septics into his developments a year. So I think we got to table this for now. We need to I'm going to take a swipe at taking your comments, Adam, and at least capturing them in the discussion, and then crafting the recommendation so it's less objectionable to you, and we can kind of go from there. The one thing we haven't hit on was the education part of the issue. I added that in, and I have a note on my notebook to talk about it. The reason I added it in here is because I was looking for a little bit more for this group to do. And if you're collecting all these experts from around the industry, tangentially or direct, and you say, okay, we need, education on this stuff. So they're going to be able to say, okay, DPH, these are the things the industry needs education on. How do we help you facilitate that? That's where the education comes from. And I think it's weird that when I went like this, it made a heart thing on my screen. So that was weird. That was the education. Do you mind if that's part of the mission area? If this type of organization does come to fruition, is to identify opportunities and means for education for the industry?
I think I'd be neutral on, since I don't think I would. I think we're going to have issues with this recommendation no matter what. That doesn't sound objectionable to me, but that particular part doesn't sound objectionable.
And Matt, I would just say that we don't necessarily have to have the DPH responsible for this education. But we talked about, installers needing to know more, sanitarians needing to know more, especially younger sanitarians. We talked about this, lack of transfer of knowledge from older, more experienced people to younger people. I don't think we've really discussed that. It has to come from DPH. Should it be done at a local level? Are there national programs? But I think there needs to be some place to go vet this need for education, and maybe that's the right place to put it. And they may come back and say DPH shouldn't be doing it. We don't have the manpower. We don't have the time. It's not the appropriate place. But we need to somehow provide a system for the locals to do that training, or a national organization or regional organization or something like that. So I think that
I think
your
anything
point
like
of just
that, we have to make sure putting it in there. Yeah, we have to make sure we don't create an unfunded requirement.
right.
So, if education becomes the purview of DPH, then somebody has to make sure that if we're going to request that there's a avenue for funding and staffing to facilitate that. I think Matt has plenty of time since he's not here. We can just volunteer him for it. But but that's something I'm always very concerned with is creating a unfunded requirement that somebody has to abide by, either a government agency or a private entity. Like, I'm always put off when I find out that I have a new requirement from the government to fill out this survey or this form or this, and yeah, it just took me $6,000 to get an expert to fill this out for me. Well, that wasn't really fair. There's no law that said that. Somebody just said, here's a requirement you have to do. So we want to avoid that for you as well. Jim, you're on mute.
Sorry. Say that we go, a private company does the training, okay, and it has to be funded by a educational training fee for each septic permit. But then that private company still has to get meet mandates or requirements from the state in order to provide us with the proper training and to be certified. So we just can't go and hire out Bob's septic training company without it being invested or vested or approved by the state. And would that relieve some of the responsibilities and hardship or from the state? Yes, but it's going to have to be definitely approved by by subsurface for that training.
I understand that. That's a good point. Because Deep would still have to say, well, this is the curriculum we need you to teach, and these are the details we need you to teach it at. So even though they're not giving the training, they have to make sure that the training is applicable and germane to the conversation. Are you guys okay if we move on to environmental engineering program capacity and focus?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Adam, I'm
Should
going to give you the floor again.
Yeah. So
Take it away, Adam.
I was a little surprised by the phrasing of the "enable to fully satisfy customer needs." We've talked about capacity in the environmental engineering program area. They're on an ability to really take on any more work, but I don't recall any examples of customers' needs being unable to be met. That's a particularly strong phrasing. It makes it really seem like there's a hindrance here. So if there's
See that's overly broad.
I don't know if it's fleshed out at these meetings. If you have some examples, I'd like to of long time frames. It might just be in the phrasing there, or are there particular instances that we're looking for here? Because it seemed like from our discussions that everyone acknowledged that the program is at capacity and it has a lot of work, but also that it seems like we're doing a relatively good job for what we do have. So I'm not sure where the not fully satisfying the needs is coming in.
Okay, Bob?
You're on mute, Bob.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Yeah, I don't think this was so much a complaint coming from our side of this. I'm thinking this is more Matt saying, I can't do any more. You guys are adding more systems because of changing the number of gallons going under DPH versus deep. We have training modules in place, but I don't have any time to, set up training for you guys. And I wear all these other hats. And again, it comes to the realization that there's only 3 or 4 people in this department.
Yeah.
And so I think that was more of that, not that there's necessarily
Yeah.
a complaint with what's happening today, but just a realization that we're asking too much from too few people right now.
Yeah. So I think my concern just boils down to then it makes it sound like there's a lot of stuff today that isn't getting done when I think most of our discussion has been focused on the areas at capacity and can't take on additional work without additional funding.
Yeah.
I will
You
concede
guys
that,
can tell me
absolutely.
if I'm different, but that was my understanding of it. The other thing is, and this comes back to a couple of things that I don't know if they're in Miriam's notes, but she's maybe mentioned in the past meetings, is that we don't want to micromanage how you guys
Yeah.
organize your system.
Mhm.
Just realize that selfishly, we want this to be our priority, septic system review and approvals to be a priority. That doesn't mean everything else that's on Matt's plate in his area right now isn't equally important. It just, that needs to be addressed. But I don't think it's in our purview necessarily to say you need to take something away from Matt and to someone else, because that's just going to overburden some other place in your department that we don't even know, what we haven't talked about. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's
And he
really,
was, he was also complaining about like this, trying to be an expert on a amount of information like this when you really want to be an amount of information like this, and I can lower my hand because I need to stop being so talkative with my hands. You know, he he felt like, his staff couldn't specialize where we need them to specialize, especially with the additional gallons per day requirement. And hopefully, and I say this, in earnest, like, Adam, I want you guys to take AT. Like, I think that our state is so far behind in new technologies that that if we leave it with deep, it'll die on the shelf. And I think that, you guys need to take it. And like, if it's gonna come, then like, you guys again can't saddle you with responsibilities and additional tasks without additional resources. So I apologize. I didn't, if that is,
Yeah.
I agree in rereading that through your filter, that is overly broad and too strongly worded. So I will make that adjustment. What else do we have in here for environmental? I mean, environmental engineering capacity.
Yeah, I think some of the mentions just of the scope of the program and touching on um, the the scope of the program and what's under the program. Reiterating some of what Miriam said at the meeting where she said it for me. And then yeah, I think that's the notes under this section.
Yeah, it's not established in statute, so it's hard to talk about in
Yeah.
statute.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're not writing statute, we're just writing our observations and recommendations. So, all right. Number 3, education. And your comments are less so here, so I'm going to still give it to you to take it and run.
Yeah, Miriam had a few comments. So we passed this around the office a little bit last night, so that's why I got to you after 5 o'clock. But you know, I think some clarity on how the education requirements are handled, who potentially could be handling that. An example of what some other states do may be helpful. And designating staff to do this without additional funding would, our staff for this is already at capacity. So I think there needs to be maybe a stronger acknowledgement in this section that the department could not take on that work without additional funding and exacerbating some of the other challenges that this documents to address.
Jim?
Oh, in the previous section, we were talk, it does talk about establishing possibly two new sections, an AIAT section and a training and educational section. So this way, it's not directly under EEP. It would be another a separate section headed by its own supervisor and workforce.
And I think, yeah, I guess if I connect the two sections instead of reading them in isolation, but so I mean, I think generally though, anything in here needs to recognize trying to think how like legislators read these, they're probably we'll read these one at a time and think about them. So I think, they need to work as a whole, but they also need to like work individually in case there's like a particular bill that's being raised for each one of these sections that's being addressed in its own way. So this thing that maybe needs to connect
Connect the two.
somehow to the other sections on the inability for the department to take more work. And there may be other options and suggestions too about how this training may be run outside of the department. But I knew we did later on. I think there are some fee suggestions too. But
we'll go down to, I don't know why this line is floating wherever it wants to float. But we'll go down to timelines and the review process. Again, a few last recommendations here.
Yeah, this is pretty, I do want to highlight this one under the timeliness and consistency though. The recommendation of the maximum 20 days, that's, I think you've heard on this call, both from Matt and from Jim, a lot of these plans that we get are not always in great shape. So, mandating a 20-day review for a plan that we may get and then like have to send back to the applicant several times or requiring, going out to the specific sites and checking on particular unique issues that may come up in the particular plan. And not providing additional, resources to and not having this particular recommendation address additional resources in order to make those times, given these known challenges, makes it difficult because these approvals are a two-way street. Yes, it's the regulator, we're looking at it and have to do our work on it. But, if we're getting, poor product sent to us, that slows down our time for review. Or poor or particularly unique and complicated issues on a particular site. It slows, all of that slows down our particular review. And Jim, you do these. review. So I'm gonna
Yep.
send it over to you.
No, and I did not make a comment on that because it does state in the Connecticut Public Health Code, section 1913B103. I apologize, I don't know the subsection, but we have 20 days, which is work days, not counting the weekends, to review a plan. So we can review it, and make comments, and then if there's comments needed to be for a plan revision, then you got to revise the plans. And I would also say that then once we get the revised plans, then the clock starts over again, for another 20 days. But it is in the public health code that we have to review and submit either an approval or why we cannot approve within 20 days.
So is this then, so is the recommendation then, Matt, just sort of mirroring that in that we need to at least get something back to the applicant within 20 days?
Yeah, I mean, that's always been it's the same thing for a building official. Like a building official has
Yeah.
30 days to review your building permit. It doesn't mean he has to approve it within 30 days or disapprove it within 30 days. He has to review it and provide comment and wait for your feedback. Now,
Okay.
there's nothing that makes us more upset than when on day 29 I get a list of 42 things, and then I immediately go back and do those 42 things and then get it back to him a week later, and then 29 days later I get okay, except for X, Y, and Z. Now I've done 3 things. So I don't know how to fix that problem. Because there's always going to be somebody who wants to push the envelope, and if the town isn't happy wanting that kind of project, they're going to drag their feet. But yeah, this is just kind of echoing that procedure. And I thought it was just for locals that had to do it in 20 days. That's why I said we recommend it for all local and state entities, especially deep. From my experience, I've heard that you guys actually turn things around fairly quickly, but deep does not. Deep looks at it as a design build opportunity, if you will. And that's frustrating and timely, So that's why I expanded that from what I thought was just the locals to state entities as well. But
Yeah, certainly if there's
Okay.
something that's not properly submitted with all the necessary information, that should give you guys an out for requesting that additional information. I guess I would question, and I assume it's in the health code, of what is required to be on a set of plans and what information is required to be submitted, so that there's an outline so people aren't mistakenly not giving you everything you need to make a proper evaluation of a design.
So I wonder if there's some rephrasing that can be done in this section just to clarify that. And then, yeah, I'll need to go back and double check what our timeframes are at the department. Just because it seemed like it was the way I was reading it, and maybe this is on me, is that it was either like thumbs up or thumbs down within 20 days. Yeah.
no, we know that never happens. Like,
Yeah.
even on the things that are statutorily that's supposed to be the case, it's still a fool would go ahead and build a project that you got your approval from that way. Jim?
Oh, I apologize. The public health code states large septic systems have 20 days. So that's right. That's anything over 2,000 gallons per day. It states here, plans for systems are submitted at least 20 days prior to approval by the local director of health. That's under large systems. But I don't know if that also includes anything less than 2,000 gallons, the 20 days. I'll have to do a little more research on that for you.
That'd be great. And then impact on failing systems. Let me try to find that one. Here. So this is the last one. I know we're a little over our time. You guys good just pushing through this last one, and then
Yeah.
we'll try to recapture these comments and go right. Are you guys good for meeting next week too on Tuesday?
Yeah, I believe I am. I'm not sure when Matt's getting back from vacation, but I think I'm good next Tuesday.
All right, this last one, it looks like DPH didn't have a whole lot to say about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's because we wore them out in the first 2 pages.
Their fingers were like blistered. They're like,
I was looking at this beforehand, and yeah, I just wonder who's administering the funds, or if that's something that just would get hammered out later.
That's a really good question. Jim,
I'm sure there would need to be like application rules and the whole structure built up around the fund with whoever does run it as well. But I think in broad concept, getting
because honestly, from the nitrogen standpoint, this type of system is going to contribute a lot more nitrogen to that problem than probably 10 well-built new systems. So if we're trying to fix a problem, this is an avenue for fixing it and making a larger impact.
Yeah, I think,
I like Jim's.
No, yeah, what you're saying, you like Jim's.
I like Jim's comments here. Did anybody have anything to add or detract? And I think this is the least offensive of our things, I guess. And I think it'll be, we'll just include it in here. I'll try to figure out, I'll put a sentence in here about how we don't know who funds it, but there's probably a government organization out there that is already set up to administer something along these lines.
It could
And it's not
actually
DPH.
be something if we end up with a codes and standards type committee that like applications come to them and they kind of determine if it's, a valid request, from the local sanitarians. I'm assuming these are probably going to come from local sanitarians that have, determined that there's a problem somewhere and that they're not getting it fixed because the homeowner or whatever is not taking care of it because they don't have the finances. And Jim could bring a recommendation back to whoever's managing the funding and determining whether it's a valid request type thing. Give them some more work if we get that set up.
Jim?
And final, if you go to subsurface sewage disposal section page on their website, they do have a section here called financial assistance programs. The USDA rural development, utilities, USDA rural development for single family housing loans and grants, community development block grants, small cities. I think that has been in effect a couple of times in my lifetime, and capital for change. But I don't know how valid those 4 financial assistance programs are, but just on their
Can you email that to me?
What's that?
Can you email that to me?
Yes. Or you just go to yeah, I'll somehow get it over to you.
All right. Rob?
Yeah, Matt, just one other quick thought on this, and that would be kind of tracking how many times this program is utilized, or are we tracking how many failures? Like, I really don't know how widespread the problem is. or, I suggested this funding, but I'm like, there may only be one request a year, or there may be 1,000 requests a year. I don't have any idea, the need. So I'd love to have some sort of tracking provision, whether that's done with DPH or the local sanitarians need to report, just so there's somebody compiling some information to determine just how widespread these issues are. And then how the money is being used, some sort of an annual reporting of something, we had 50 requests and we funded 25, and this is how many of the average dollars we gave out, or something to that would probably be helpful if this thing's going to go into place.
Yep, and I'll put into our issue that, we don't really know the scope of this issue. So if we can, we need to do some more research to understand, if this is a huge issue or not. So I'll add that to the issue and some to the discussion. And we can kind of go from there. All right. We're 6 minutes over. Is there anything else anybody wants to add, retract? We're good. All right. Have a great holiday if this is your holiday. If not, enjoy your days off and enjoy the snow.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Have a
And
great
Matt,
holiday.
if you want to forward over
Happy
like
holiday.
a revision or whatever, let me know, or we can
All right.
talk it through.
And we'll
I'll
do
work
this
on it with
again.
some eggnog.
Okay.
We're gonna do this
Sounds
again
good.
next Tuesday, right?
Thanks for doing it.
Thank you.
And we'll meet next Tuesday. Yeah. I'll get it to you guys as soon as I can.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you all.